Okay, this video is called Health Metaphors, and I'm really doing this sort of as a prelude to get you ready for the next video, which is going to be the newsletter of the month about mitochondria. So basically a couple points though. What I'm trying to do is teach you how to think effectively so you'll know what to do and you'll be able to think your way through problems. So first of all, you're going to hear a lot of people promoting soy, and in my opinion, it's a good litmus test. If you hear somebody promoting soy, you know they're BSing you, okay? And I've shown this before too, and this is why you can't just read the medical literature and just go by what it says. That sounds nice, but it's not realistic because, like, most of the modern nutritional literature is not true. It's funded by corporations and industry. So if there is information available on stuff from, let's say, like the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, that's usually pretty good. 1980s, you know, a bit of both, and the later you get, the more modern you get, the more likely whatever you're reading is industry funded and it's bogus. So, for example, I talked about soy. You know, here's this woman. She's got lovely breasts, Virginia. Okay, she's beautiful. Here's a soy plant. Does a soy plant have breasts? Does a soy plant have a Virginia? No, it doesn't. Then why does it have off the charts estrogens? Because estrogens can function like as, in a sense, a pesticide, and we're the pest, okay? You know, the high estrogen can make the animal that eats it infertile, can make it goitrogenic, hypothyroid. So what I'm trying to say is there's lots of information on thyroid being kind of toxic, and it's part of what I see as a uniform pattern of trying to sterilize people. Okay, the people that run the world, they don't care about you. To them, you're just like an animal that talks, okay? They want to decrease the size of the population. So do you think it's a coincidence that the protein in processed food comes from soy, which lowers your fertility? Do you think it's a coincidence that the sweetener comes from high fructose corn syrup that often has HG in it, that often has sprayed with atrazine, super powerful estrogenic, turns male frogs into females? Do you think it's a coincidence that F- is in the water that causes infertility? Do you think it's a coincidence that MSG is in all the food that causes infertility, contributes to infertility? Do you think it's a coincidence that I'll just spell it, A, L, then a U, then an M, I N is in your water? It's sprayed into your air that causes infertility and lowers IQ. All this subsidized public stuff causes infertility, lowers IQ. Do you think that's a coincidence? Okay, so I'm just kind of getting your, helping you to be able to think, so you'll have a chance. Okay. Oops, I've got to go to the other one here. Okay, and basically, simplified version of it is, if you, go down this path of low fat, low sodium, vegan, avoid the alcohol and all the other toxins and all the chump stuff like the soy and the good fat slogans, you can do pretty well, okay? And that's how you win the game. I mean, all this other stuff, all the meat and oil products, you don't want to be like regular people. All day long I see them. Like I said, my internal medicine friends and my own personal experience matches it. Almost all the people over 60, they're mentally slow, they're like a cow. Ah, yes, thank you. You don't want to end up like that. And there's no escape from it other than to go, that I'm aware of. And I've been studying this. I've been a doctor over 30 years, and I've been trying to figure this stuff out pretty carefully for years, okay? All the meat, oil, processed food eaters, they all get drug, chop, surgery, die prematurely, suffer terribly, okay? Doesn't, it helps if you're a nice person, but it's not going to save you from this. You got to go down this path if you want to have a chance to do well, good odds to do well. And I've seen some people say, oh, well, so-and-so ate meat or whatever and lived to 85 or something. I've seen those people, and they're typically cognitively impaired and have endless problems. They're falling apart. It's a disaster. Okay, you start getting a little bit smarter and having a better chance when you have like a Copernican moment and see, gee, the conventional medical system can't cure any of the current diseases. They don't even know what causes any of the current diseases. They're kind of a joke. Whereas the low-fat vegans, they're curing diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease left and right in terms of having people that get better. Their Johnson still works. They don't need stents. Okay, they don't need any pills. That's what you want. Okay. All right, and then also you sort of get to like, here's, the Plato's cave, and you realize almost all of the conventional stuff that people are told is simply not true. And it's just a way to keep And like too, you see a lot of these, what I would call them fake nutrition experts. They'll tell you some good stuff, but then they're going to sit there and tell you should drink tea. You know, I worry about tea from the F minus in the aluminum, and then they'll say, well, that stuff isn't absorbed as much. Okay, well, I still wouldn't be too safe about it because you're eating other things in that meal that are going to potentially cause it to be more absorbed. I just would stay away from it. Okay. And like I said too, you hear somebody telling you soy and MSG and tea, all this stuff is good, and these good fats. I don't buy it. I don't think the data supports it other than, you know, the new corporate funded more recent stuff. Okay, so anyways, this is Platelet's Cave and coming out of the Platelet Cave like Socrates, like Aristotle, etc. And then people say, oh, well, so-and-so has all the big degrees from the big university. They must know what they're talking about. No. Like I said, conventional medicine's like Lilliputians compared to the ability. You give me a health coach that knows the vegan diet, they're going to cure tons of patients with diabetes, hypertension, obesity, all these problems. You get me an internal medicine doctor, you know, who graduated first of their class, did their residency at Mass General. All they're going to do is drugs and surgery. They don't know. So what I'm basically saying is the chief of medicine at the Ivy League medical schools is basically like somebody out of the 1700s just doing phlebotomies. You know, it's like a clown show. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what causes disease, and they don't know how to treat disease. And I'm just telling you it's the truth. They're a joke. Okay. Phlebotomy actually does have some therapeutic benefits in some situations. Okay. All right, now here's the one of the old joke about you got two bulls up on a hill and the two bulls are talking to each other. Hey, look down there, look at all those cows. Why don't we run down there and have sex with one of those cows? And then that's what the young bull says. And the old bull says, why don't we walk down there and have sex with all of them? And the relevance of this to health and medicine is that the typical way conventional medicine thinks is it separates all the diseases into separate categories. Say, this is heart disease and high cholesterol, take this statin pill, okay? This is hypertension, high blood pressure, take this set of pills, okay? This is impotence, take this set of pills. Cerebrovascular disease, take this set of pills, all right? Blood clot in your leg, take this set of pills. And so what I'm saying is the better way to think is holistic. Basically, when you go low fat, low sodium, vegan, no alcohol, no meats, no sweets, no oils, etc., you often cure a whole bunch of diseases all at once. Hypertension improves, atherosclerosis improves, the Johnson improves, the mental clarity improves. And that's how you want to try to win the game, is just make yourself as healthy as possible and you'll have a better prognosis. If you got cancer, a whole bunch of things all improve if you just go down that path. And so that's the smart path. If you still can't fix all your problems with that and you need to take a pill on top of that, fine, take your pills. But don't just separate everything and then you end up kind of typically having a bad outcome like the typical chump. All right, and this is just showing all this stuff tends to get it. You're much less likely to get cancer. You're much more likely that Johnson's going to work. The coronary arteries disease, exercise capacity is going to increase. The diabetes quite often it'll resolve if you catch type 2 within 4 years and you still got functioning pancreatic beta cells. You'll be skinny. You'll look better. You'll have more glow, vitality, skin perfusion as you get older, and you're going to live longer. So everything goes in a positive direction. Okay, and it's pretty simple. I mean, you know, people all day long, like I said, I did a surgical internship. I was always amazed. All these people, they'll sign a consent for anything. Open heart surgery, craniotomy, peripheral vascular bypass. Sure, doc, where do I sign? They don't even have a look of fear in their eye. They don't know what they're getting into. On the other hand, you tell them, here, it's simple. Eat starches, fruits, and berries. Oh, no, doc, I'm not ready for that, okay? Okay, in conventional health, it ignores largely the benefits of religion. It doesn't understand sun. It says put sunscreen all over yourself. Sunscreen's for chumps, full of estrogenic chemicals and other toxic chemicals. Okay. All right, and so then you sort of have this idea, well, if I could just do that, low-fat, low-sodium, vegan, get my sunshine, maintain my relationships, have my religion, then I'll live happily ever after. And to a large extent, a lot of times that could be true, but in the modern world, things have gotten even more complicated. So like I said, the vegan community is real good. The good ones, the low-fat vegan community is good. There's a bogus, big fake. I think there's a giant fake component in the vegan community telling people to eat nuts and seeds and flax and soy and MSG and telling you that coffee and caffeine are good for you. That's all nonsense, okay? In my opinion, that's all corporate promoted BS to trick the pros and keep you fat and sick and plug up your arteries, make you infertile and stupid. Okay, so this is sort of the elephant in the room that even the low-fat vegan community is missing on, is all these toxins. And I've given a whole bunch of lecture about these things, but just so you're aware of it, all these things are nickel and diming you, and so you want to learn about them and avoid them. And the best way to avoid them is just be simple, like Adam and Eve, but keep your indoor heating and plumbing. And the 800-pound gorilla is EMF. You can't completely escape from that, but that's another reason why you want to optimize everything else so that that doesn't do as much damage to you. And sort of the concept of a threshold. I'll get into that a little more in just one sec. When you look at a cell, you got about 15,000 times more calcium outside the cell in the extracellular space, extracellular matrix you can call it, compared to the amount of calcium within the cell cytoplasm. And this calcium in the cell cytoplasm is very tightly controlled, because when it goes up, it'll activate the cell to release its neurotransmitter or do whatever that cell does, in a muscle cell to contract, for example. And this plasma membrane electrical gradient of negative 65 millivolts is maintained largely by the potassium-sodium ATPase. And it's pumping 2 potassium in, 3 sodiums out. So you're pumping 3 positive charge out, 2 positive charge in, so more positive charge going out, net going out, and you'll have a negative electrical gradient across this plasma membrane of the cell. The outer membrane of the cell is the plasma membrane. You'll also have a concentration gradient of sodium. You'll have 10 times higher sodium outside the cell than inside the cell. That ends up being important. So if you have a positive sodium out here, you'll have a sodium charge out here. It's positive. It's going to want to come into the cell because it's attracted to the negative 65 millivolts charge inside the cell. So that's the electrical gradient that attracts it. It's also attracted the sodium to come into the cell because there's a sodium concentration gradient, 10 to 1. So sodium really wants to come into the cell. Now, when you want to pump calcium out of the cell, you have to pump against a pretty high gradient. It's 15,000 times higher outside the cell than inside the cell. So you're going to have to use ATP. And you're going to use ATP over here, the energy of the cell. And then once you've established this sodium concentration gradient with the electrical gradient, you can couple that to pumping calcium out. And this is called the NACA exchanger. Na for sodium, Ca for calcium. Na means natrium or sodium in Latin. Ca is just for calcium. All right, so this is called the NCX, the sodium calcium exchanger, or the NACA exchanger. All right, and you're always going to need ATP. So this is just secondary active transport, meaning that it's coupled to the gradient produced by the ATP pump over here. So that's going to be a recurrent theme. You need energy, always need energy to pump calcium out against its gradient. And it's also, we'll learn later, it's going to be stored in an organelle called the endoplasmic reticulum. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, but this is a big deal. Calcium is what turns a cell on. It's like the light switch in the cell. And here's a typical neuron. Here's a cell body, and it'll receive neurotransmitters up here in its dendrites. Dendrite means dendron, like a tree. And anyways, once the cell is activated, it reaches a threshold. It'll fire an action potential. Begins here at the axon hillock. It's transmitted down the axon of the neuron, and then it'll reach the synaptic terminal. At the synaptic terminal, this action potential will activate the voltage-gated calcium channels, and they'll release calcium, and it'll come from the extracellular matrix into the cell, inside the cell, into the cytoplasm, and it'll cause this elevation in calcium will cause the neurotransmitter vesicles to travel to the synaptic cleft, merge with the plasma membrane, release their neurotransmitter vesicles. They'll travel across the synaptic cleft, and they will exert an effect on the postsynaptic neuron. And that's how brain cells function all day long. So anything that increases calcium here is going to cause more neurotransmitter to be released. And this on and off of calcium, it's like all roads lead to calcium. There's lots of things converging on a neuron to increase that calcium. And under normal conditions, when it's all happening natural, that's good. That's a major part of learning and memory that makes your brain cells function as they should. And the point I'm trying to make, though, is you have to watch out. There's a lot of bad things that are also increasing the cytoplasm calcium, and you want to minimize them as much as possible. Mitochondrial inhibitors are a really important point, is that they decrease the ability of the cell to make ATP. Most energy in a cell is made in the mitochondria. So if you have these chemicals that inhibit it, you'll get decreased ATP production, which means, we just talked about it, you always need ATP to pump the calcium out of the cytoplasm. You're going to start getting calcium accumulating in that cytoplasm, and too much neurotransmitter in your neurons being released. If you're in a muscle, like a skeletal muscle, or let's say a vascular smooth muscle along your arteries, you're going to have too much calcium in the cell. The cell's going to stay contracted, and that's going to raise blood pressure. And there's a whole bunch of things that'll do it. So you don't want these other things, peripheral, unnecessary things being activated, because they'll mess up your physiology. And then I joked that it's like the Lord of the Rings, one ring to control them all, one ion to control them all is calcium. So everything's all about getting calcium down under normal conditions so you don't activate the cell for no reason. One ion to control them all, and it is calcium. So here's another look at calcium. Look at all the things happening here that want to push up calcium. All these toxins, MSG, MFG, aspartame, they're mimicking the glutamate. Glutamate's 80% of brain neurotransmitters, so MSG can mimic it, monosodium glutamate. Okay, aspartame also is an excitatory amino acid functioning as a neurotransmitter. Caffeine raises the same hormones as psychological stress, which means cortisol, which increases glutamate transmission across that synapse. Sleep deprivation is like a stress equivalent, does the same thing. Okay, and then there's multiple other ways that you can get things pushing up that cytoplasm calcium. If you inhibit the circuit pump, the pump into the endoplasmic reticulum, ATP dependent, to get calcium out of cytoplasm, you'll increase cytoplasm calcium, and then you'll start activating pathways that you don't want. Okay, we talked about the plasma membrane, electrical gradient, negative 65 millivolts, and sodium gradient, 10 to 1. And then here's also the calcium pumps, pumping calcium into the endoplasmic reticulum of the neuron. It's called SERCA, with the S standing for sarcoplasm, because in the skeletal muscle it has a unique name, the endoplasmic reticulum. It's called the sarcoplasm. Okay, PMCA is plasma membrane calcium ATPase, to use ATP to pump calcium out of the cell. So in order to get all these things to run, you need ATP here, you need ATP here, you need ATP here, and this is coupled to this. So you need ATP for everything. And so I'm going to be talking about mitochondria in just a little bit, my next lecture. So what I'm trying to say is the cell's totally dependent on that mitochondria to make enough ATP to run all these pumps. And then we previously talked about my theory. This is the PeterRogersMD theory of neurovascular uncoupling as a cause of dementia. So basically, you've got a fixed rate of neuron activity level, okay? And you got a fixed rate of oxygen glucose delivery, and they should be matched. A small offset, and the body can usually compensate pretty well, especially when somebody's young. But the bigger this gap gets, let me do it this way, the bigger this gap gets between oxygen and glucose delivery, the more likely the neuron's just going to die, going to apoptosis. So MR is for metabolic rate, GOD is for glucose oxygen delivery. I kind of jokingly, obviously GOD spells something else, but I made the point, the cell needs that to live. And you get a moderate uncoupling where the metabolic rate is much higher. Metabolic rate is much higher compared to the oxygen glucose delivery, or moderately higher. That neuron will survive, but it won't be functioning so great. Then you get the split between them even bigger, whereby the metabolic rate is ramped up super high because of stimulants, MSG, caffeine, sleep deprivation, psychological stress, tobacco, amphetamine, attention deficit meds, glyphosate, excitotoxin, and you drop this oxygen and glucose delivery. This gap is too big. Those neurons are going to start dying. Okay, so things that will drop the oxygen glucose delivery: hypotension, overtreated hypertension, capillary basement membrane thickening due to diabetes, due to hypertension, for example, atrial fibrillation, less pumping power, congestive heart failure, less pumping power, aortic regurg, aortic stenosis, etc. Okay, mitochondria inhibitors dropping energy production, SERCA inhibitors dropping ability to pump calcium out of cytoplasm. All of those things are widening the gap and predisposing your neurons to go into apoptosis, meaning they can't meet their energy demands and they die. So basically, you want to build up all the good things and avoid all the bad things. So it's like a seesaw concept with a lot of stuff in physiology. And what I'm also trying to say here, every one of us, in this conversation here, you're basically like the straw on the camel back. No matter what you do, you're going to be exposed to some bad things. There's going to be a little bit of contaminants in your food, a little bit of heavy metals in your food. You're going to be EMF'd a little bit during your day by Wi-Fi, cell phone towers, etc. No matter what you do. So what you don't want to do is keep putting straws on the camel's back. That'll potentially, break the camel's back and tip you into disease and to something irreversible. So here basically is just showing, the idea. This is King Arthur and his knights, seeking the Holy Grail, the
optimal source of healing. Supposedly it was the blood of Jesus Christu when his side was pierced by a sword, and the blood can cause anything to heal. Okay, but anyways, that's the legend. But what I'm trying to say is, none of the knights were able to reach the Holy Grail or find it, except for Galahad, who made himself worthy. So, making himself worthy of healing. So what I'm saying is, make yourself worthy, and the way you do that, in a sense, is just, stick with the low-fat, low-sodium, whole food, vegan diet, get your exercise, get your sleep, manage your stress, have your religion, have your purpose in life, all that stuff. Because what a lot of people do is they half-ass it. They say, well, I'm cutting down on this or that. And so in a sense, the body heals 2 steps up, but their bad habits knock them 2 steps back down, and they never improve. And then sooner or later, they make a mistake, boom, irreversible disease. I see that all the time. They're screwed. They end up on dialysis. They're screwed. They have a stroke. They're screwed. They have a myocardial infarction. Just recently, I found out one of my relatives, had a had a heart attack. And so it's like, well, why didn't you talk to me? Well, they don't talk to me because they think, oh, I'm a little bit of a stuck-up genius, but I'm not a cardiologist. They go to their cardiologist, okay? Their cardiologist gets paid to put in stents, okay? The cardiologist doesn't get paid to teach them about nutrition. And a lot of people think, well, I'm doing okay. I eat a plant-based diet, but they're eating the oils and processed food and junk food and soy and all this other crap. And caffeine and stuff. So anyways, and then they go and they get stents. They get 2 stents, and I'm like, why didn't you talk to me? I like to help people. I do it for free. Any of my friends or family or people who know my acquaintances, I give them advice and help them for free. Okay, I know it better than their so-called specialists. I had this one lady friend, doctor. She was about, let's just ballpark her at 60, okay? And she's like, oh, I have to get another pacemaker revision. And I'm like, did your doctor tell you to eat a low-fat vegan diet? And she's like, oh, well, no, we haven't talked about that. And I'm like, well, why do you go to him? He's an idiot. And she goes, oh, no, he's the most prestigious doctor in the big city where she lives, okay? And I'm like, pretty soon that's going to be, on your tombstone. She went to the most prestigious doctor. I said, your doctor's an idiot. If he's a cardiologist, you've had 2 myocardial infarctions and 2 pacemakers, and he's never taught you about low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet. He's an idiot, okay? He stinks, all right? And, the patients get caught up in the prestige. He's the full professor, chief of cardiology at a big fancy hospital. I said, I don't care. He's a bullshitter, okay? And I told you, at the Ivy League, they all stink. They're all telling people to eat Mediterranean diet and to, take all these pills, get stents, get open heart surgery. Where's the people teaching you low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet, okay? I know the famous cardiologists at Harvard, okay? And they're trying to say that coronary artery disease nowadays is caused by inflammation. Esselstyn didn't have to do anything except put the patients on a low-fat diet, and he didn't have any recurrent coronary events. So yeah, inflammation's caused by the high-fat meat diet, but it's not like there's some bacterial infection in there, okay? Yeah, I know you can find bacteria in some atherosclerotic plaques, but you don't need to take antibiotics to reverse or to prevent coronary artery disease from progressing. So that's the money thing to focus on. So, you want to find out who's cured the disease, who never gets the disease, how can I do what they do? And then you got a chance to get better. All these prestigious places, they get paid to make money off you. And so, I'm trying to give you a chance. All right, this is the end of this talk. So we'll leave it at that. And this talk was just to get you ready for the newsletter talk that's going to be about mitochondria in more detail.